Welcome to the Education Innovators Podcast. I'm Eric Byron. This is season 4, and it is my privilege to host this show where I get to talk with thought leaders and experts from all over the world. I'm so glad you're here. Let's get started.
Each country does have all of those different touch points that are constantly, again, making your brain think in a different way and connect in a different way. You know, your cultural script stops working in the same way, and you're all of a sudden in a position to be more curious instead of certain about what life is about. And the listening instead of assuming tends to happen more naturally.
This episode is about experiential learning, and my guest is Kimberly Haley-Coleman. She's the founder and executive director of GlobalWare. Over the last 25 years, she has helped tens of thousands of people raise their cultural awareness and empathy through volunteering experiences in over 25 countries. Amazing stuff. She's a great speaker. Keep listening.
Today I have with me Kimberly Haley-Coleman. She's the founder and executive director of GlobalWare, a US and Canada-based nonprofit that leads and mobilizes volunteers for short-term service projects in over 25 countries since the year 2000. With a background in international business development and finance, she previously held leadership roles at global firms including CNBC, Space Services International, and Investtools. So welcome to the show, Kimberly.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so delighted to be here.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. And I'm really fascinated actually in what you're doing with GlobalWare. But before we dive into that, I have to ask, just to get to know you a little better here, you spent some time with Space Services, and they have a program called Celestis. So I worked in the funeral business. I was a
so you may be familiar with it.
I was a fourth generation funeral director before I ran off and joined the circus. That's a whole nother story.
Oh my gosh. But well, then I imagine you have what country were you when we were doing this?
That was when I was growing up in Massachusetts.
Okay,
yeah, my dad's family was in the funeral business there. But anyway, you ended up working at this company that does burials in space.
We put dead people in space. That's right.
Dead people in space. Yeah, I just need to hear this story. So how did you end up working there, and what was your role?
I had a very circuitous path. My entire career was not a straight line, but everything in my background, both academically and in terms of my experience, was really about other cultures. I had a master's in art history, an MBA in international business. I grew up traveling a lot and studying other cultures, and I had a number of sales roles. And it turns out that these space-based burials are really not something that many people in the North Americas are interested in. It's primarily people in Germany, Brazil, Japan, where there's more of a cultural fit and fascination. And so it was an area that just made a lot of sense to me because I was so interested in culturally what made that interesting. I was living in Houston at the time, and which is, space city. So it just a whole bunch of elements came together for me to end up. And so I was really had international business development at that time. It really meant talking to funeral homes in other countries. So yeah, that's how I got into it. And I am
curious. So why, I think you said Japan and like Germany, this was
Brazil.
Brazil. Why? What is it about their culture that
it's just how we grieve, how we handle death is something that is very tied to our culture. You look at a country like India, where cremation is a normal part of a much more of the default way of handling death. And, there are cultures and countries where burials in a coffin, these are just so tied to a culture. So those particular countries just have a different relationship to death and even to their fascination culturally with space. In terms of what you guys do, I feel like this is such a really interesting tie-in because it's really about an experiential thing where, hands-on isn't just a buzzword. It's where you're Your identity is shaped because you took some kind of action instead of just observing in terms of reflecting who you are. And so the kinds of people who decide they want to put their ashes into space are shaped culturally, their identity, their approach to death is something that is culturally very different from what someone who might be, say, Irish Catholic is
Yeah.
thinking of in terms of how they want to have their death observed. So,
Yeah. I don't
yeah.
want to get too far off the trail here, but I just want to comment. So part of my study, I had a degree in mortuary science, but part of what we studied was that cultural aspect because they say actually society itself is almost defined by how we treat our dead and how we celebrate life and the end of life. So we're going all the way back to the Egyptians, and of course, all of that stuff, the pyramids and
Yeah.
everything, was really a celebration of death and the way they did their passage from this life. Anyway, it's a very interesting topic, and I was quite curious about what you had learned about why some cultures more embrace this idea of burial in space. Anyway, let's get back to let's talk about globe aware. Um, this is fascinating for me. And as I mentioned right before we started to record, I think my daughter actually did a trip with you guys. So she was going to high school here in Hong Kong at an international school, and they did a 1 week trip to Nepal.
Ah,
And
yes.
yes, and part of the program there, they went and they were building bathroom facilities for some community there, and then they slept in tents and um, admittedly, I don't think my daughter really enjoyed the trip very much. Yeah, sleeping on the ground and taking cold showers was not really her idea of fun. But
So it may not have
yeah.
been our program. We don't have any programs where we are intense, but
Oh, okay.
we're not the only ones in this space.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I didn't see the name Globaware. I hadn't picked up on that when she was doing it, but the concept, I loved the idea personally for her to go and see this rural poor community in Nepal and what their lifestyle is and get a little reality check for her and her comfy life in Hong Kong where everything is super convenient. And yes, I mean, we had a mall in our building. You just go downstairs and you could shop and eat and get whatever you needed, including a haircut or go to the dentist, was all right in our building. And so for her to go and see this community where everything is a struggle, I was hoping would be kind of eye-opening for her. And I think ultimately it was. She just didn't enjoy it so much. Anyway, and I remember she ruined a really, really nice sleeping bag on the trip. She came back and had destroyed it. Anyway, tell me about Globalware and the vision there. What is it you're trying to do? And for our audience that assume is not familiar with Globalware.
So, really, we're about short term adventures and services, 1 week programs. We really fit into a space that really didn't exist 25 years ago. Really, if you wanted to volunteer, you were either going to be doing the Peace Corps for 2.5 years, or you were going to be doing a church mission trip that may or may not be available when you had time off. Most programs have been set up for students or retirees that have much more time off. So this is designed to be an experience where people are learning and giving back in a very short period of time. But again, our accommodations are all, running water, flushing toilets. You have a door in a room and all that. So that's what makes me think it
Okay.
may not be Globalware that she went on. But that said, our feeling is this is very much about experiential learning, that it's moving from the abstract to this embodied experience where, someone may have read or watched something on poverty or migration or housing or cultural awareness, but may not remember it. And when you have met the person, poured a concrete floor, worked side by side with a family, that these are the kinds of experiences that shape who you are, that shape your identity, that shape your perspective and your lens. And
Mhm.
that's what our experiences are about. These 1 week programs where we're accomplishing something specific and concrete that is very tightly organized. It's not just soft skills where we're going to go and try and play soccer with kids or maybe be in a classroom and do busy work. And we're really trying to do something substantive that the local community has decided is important to them. And that's really the key piece for us, is that everything starts from the community. It's something they want. They've got the buy-in. They've chosen the materials. The fee that somebody pays to participate, about $1,500, is paying for the local foremen that are there overseeing the project, that is paying for the materials and the insurance and all that. And they are making sure that we're doing things in a way that are going to be accepted. And so really, it's that combination of emotion and effort and novelty that creates that memory consolidation that has the social cognition and consequence that can stay with you for so long, and yet in a realm where risk is really mitigated. And while there might be some unknowns and uncertainty, the most aspects of the experience are really prescribed. So they might be new to the volunteers and the participants, but because we are in the same community week after week, we know the community members and the environment where the hospitals are, the foods that are going to be something that the volunteers are excited about, that are going to keep them healthy, that they actually like. So anyway, that's a bit about what we do. You know, from my perspective, a week installing concrete floors in the homes of single moms in Guatemala is going to teach more about inequality than a semester of reading about it. And so
Yeah.
that's what our programs are. We're in 26 countries around the world, but all of them focus on that. How can you really get to know the local community and the local culture in a way you wouldn't as a traditional tourist, and connect as equals with the local community? And how can you also contribute it in a really substantial, concrete way in a very short-term period of time? And that's what we're about.
Yeah. So how many floors in Guatemala have you guys
Oh,
poured?
I couldn't even tell you. I couldn't tell you because we've been there for years and years and years and years.
Okay.
But we can usually finish one out in about 4 days. And so everything we do was pretty much designed to finish it. There are times when, for whatever reason, some kind of extraordinary weather event might happen, or something's not curing at the correct rate or whatever. But then there will be a group to follow to make sure that it's finished. And of course, in this world of social media, we're able to upload and photos and videos and interviews to keep people tied into whatever's happening on the ground where we work. So
Yeah.
that's really a nice aspect of social media from our perspective.
Yeah. So I'm just trying to imagine this. So how many in a group? So you've got 10, 12 people? Is that
On
about
average,
right?
so if
Yeah.
people go to our website, I mean, the way people get involved in a program like this, it's more like signing up for a cruise. They pick the location and the date from our website.
Okay.
And so once they've done that, we send them all the materials they need to know, and it's very structured. You know, our coordinator picks you up, and this means we typically have 10 to 12 people on those programs. That said, not every week is listed, and the weeks that aren't listed are usually corporate, school, and church groups that can be up to
Uh,
250 people.
okay.
If we think of a group of 250 as 25 groups of 10. You know, we
Okay.
have a coordinator with each group of 10 to 12 people. So even if we have 250 people together staying on location and we're eating breakfast and dinner together, when we're on the program site and the work site, you're still with a smaller group, because we really feel like for that cultural connection to take place, if you're 250 people showing up in a village, you can
Yeah.
lose that
Right.
that intimacy. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. So Guatemala, what are some other
So,
places? Where else are
goodness,
you
we're
going?
really heavy in Latin America, Southeast Asia, the African continent, parts of Eastern Europe. Those tend to be, we're in locations, we're looking for places that are safe. You know, they're not war torn or having a current disease outbreak. Um, we're not handling heavy equipment and machinery or putting people high on ladders, but we also want places that are culturally very unlike our own, because
Mm.
that's where the learning takes place. This learning, this experiential learning that really focuses on initiative, responsibility, moral courage, showing up in the real world and learning not just to be a spectator, to be a participant. And so the locations that will allow us to do all that tend to be places that aren't just carbon copies of whatever we're used to. And most of our volunteers do come from, I would say, North America, the Western world, Australia, Canada. We also have Canadian charity status. And so we are reaching out and crossing the aisle, so to speak, culturally with cultures that aren't based in those places. That's really our focus. We want people to be exposed to a country where they're speaking a different language and believe differently about how they bury their dead and how they learn and what's important to them. And yet, of course you learn that and see that we all want our children to be safe and fed and interested in the life they're living. But there are these differences. I think you're right that how we treat our dead is one way of experiencing that. In Peru, the Incas were all buried, sitting down so that in the afterlife they were ready to stand up, and they're all facing the sun. And this says a lot about their spiritual faith and what they believe. So we like that concept of putting someone in an environment that is very unlike what they're used to. It really kind of helps you fire on these different cylinders to, if you're taken out of your everyday environment, and allows you to learn more quickly and deeply in a more dramatic way. It's more life-changing.
Yeah, no, it's really, really interesting to me. And so one of the things that I see and struggle with, if you will, is so many people, particularly our young folks today, spending just exorbitant amounts of time looking at YouTube videos and
Oh my gosh.
IG and TikTok. And I just want to shake them sometimes and say, put your phone down and experience the real
Yeah.
world.
Yeah.
So, and to me, it's about the senses, right? When you're just watching a video of something, you're kind of getting somebody else's perspective, what they're sharing about their own experience. But when you get out and do your experience, right now, you don't just see, you smell, you touch, you taste, you hear the sounds, the music, the language of these people that you just can't get that from watching a TikTok video.
Oh,
And
so
so,
true.
so tell me about how you kind of embrace that. How do you make
Yeah.
sure they're really getting that whole sensory experience when they're there?
Yeah, Gen Z and Gen Alpha, I agree they need it more than ever. They're chronically anxious and risk averse, I think, because of a lot of that digital overload they see.
Yeah.
And one of the things we really feel happens is the empowerment. When you are there, whether we're building a home in Kenya, where you might come from an environment where a teenage girl is constantly feeling like she's looking at a feed of people in their bathing suits and everything is about how they feel like they compare in that world, as opposed to putting your phone down in places where we may not even have data accessible, and you're sitting there side by side building a home that's giving someone a better way of living and getting to know them, and see the joy that happens from getting to know them, and all of a sudden feeling like you matter and that you can make a difference and you can have an impact. So we feel like that also has a consequence of reducing anxiety when you feel like you do have a place in the world and that it's not all about how you look in a digital feed. They've grown up in this algorithmic life. And in many ways, it might seem like safe spaces where there's sort of this helicoptered, curated environment that seems so safe. And yet it has created this comparative life that does not necessarily lead to happiness. And so having that extra perspective, I think, really helps give them a connection to humanity
Mm.
that they may not be getting, and real-time feedback that is slower, less about visual perfection and more about shared universality of humanity, which again builds confidence, not just competence, and something that can be hard to give for kids who are just living in front of screens these days. And I feel for them. I have two grown daughters, and look, you see it. or even rates of suicide and depression, this feeling of unworthiness and isolation in a world that is ostensibly so globalized.
Yeah.
That we have these tools that how do you reach that? How do you tap into it?
Yeah. How many, you must have a count, right? About how many people have been through your program in 25 years?
I can't give you the answer to that. It's up to about because I don't honestly know, but we're at about 3,000 a year, and
Okay.
it can vary. In 2020, we had a couple of hundred.
Oh, because of
So
COVID, right.
yeah, when they close down borders, that's not really great for cross-border service, in-person service learning.
Yeah.
Um,
So what did you
but
do?
we got a lot out of it. And I have to say, when we came back, everybody was so passionate and keyed into reconnecting in that way. So
Yeah.
strangely, it made us even more grateful.
Yeah. So does the program include, you have like foremen who help with, any kind of construction or, the hands-on work that folks are doing, but do you also have guides, if you will, people who are kind of
Yes.
locals and
Yeah, we
talk
have a
about,
coordinator who's in charge of each program that is the with and shepherding with the volunteers the entire week and shepherding them through everything from the pickup at the airport to dropping them off. They're there with all the meals. They're there because we don't expect our volunteers to have any skills, whether it's language skills or any of the project skills. It's a learning experience. We aren't Doctors Without Borders or Engineers Without Borders. We're not expecting people to come with the skills. They're going to learn
okay,
about the culture, about the language, about their real needs, the real beauties of that culture. And it's our coordinator that really leads all that. And so we even have, every morning we have a cultural discussion about a topic. It might be, hey, did you know in Costa Rica they don't use standard street addresses to mail things to people? They write out a paragraph and we discuss what that means
huh,
and what other cultures do that. And in the evening, we have a reflective exercise. So it might be discuss a kindness you saw today or something you're grateful for to really help more quickly tease out these lessons and to hear what other people are learning. And it's our coordinator. Really, our coordinators are the heroes and champions of all of this. They are also the conduit, the go-between between our volunteers and the local community. They come from the community. Our
okay,
coordinators are from that community. And so, by knowing most of our coordinators are in their late 50s, early 60s, and have been doing this for us for a couple of decades. And so, they really have a good sense for both what volunteers are able to give and want to experience, and what the local community wants and needs so that they can bridge that gap.
yeah,
Our volunteers are often really focused on productivity and accomplishing something. And many times our local communities are culturally not as focused on productivity as they are how you experience the now.
yeah.
And so it's our coordinator that walks that tightrope between them to keep everybody as fulfilled and making it as meaningful an experience as possible.
All right, let's take a quick commercial break so I can plug the human intelligence movement. This is not a paid advertisement. I'm just a fan. The human intelligence movement, their mission is to ensure that all students have the skills to thrive and succeed in an AI world. Join the movement. I've got a link in the show notes. All right, now back to my conversation with Kimberly Haley-Coleman. We're going to continue to talk about how the positive impact of these experiences, and they're not just a benefit to the people who are receiving help in these countries, but it's also really about the positive impact it's having on the volunteers themselves, the experiential learning they're gaining. All right, let's get back to it.
Okay, one of the things I've heard you mention, I did do some research on you, and I've heard you talk about a few times, is that quite often these groups are multi-generational. Why is
Yes.
that important?
Yeah, it is a different kind of travel. Certainly travel like you think of Bali, Hawaii, and people might go, with a significant other, or maybe with their immediate family. But there's something about experiencing things with different age groups where you're having this bucket list experience. Our programs are in where you can see Angkor Wat in Cambodia and Machu Picchu and Cusco. So we're, operating in places where we know people are going to want to see these bucket list items, but they're experiencing something that is transformational. And we know that when people are with their various generations, whether it's children, grandchildren, brothers, sisters, grandparents, that it's a unique opportunity for them to learn about each other and to experience these really life-changing moments at the same time. And you can go to the beach and have a great time and relax. It tends not to be as transformational, particularly in terms of perspective. And for somebody who, a boomer, for somebody coming from a different generation to be able to point out something that they see in common with that local culture and to hear from them locally, or for a young person to say what they're getting out of this experience that they may not get at home. It's a chance for a grandparent or great grandparent to learn about the younger generation by having this contrast, this environment that really, again, teases out what might not be very apparent in your regular everyday environment, whatever that is. So while we are not actively saying, hey, this needs to be multi-generational, we've found that it is just an environment type of experience that tends to attract that.
Yeah. No,
And we're grateful
it's
for.
interesting, and it makes me think of an example in my own family, traveling at one point with my kids. My son was, I don't know, I guess in his early 20s, and we were in Barcelona. We did a hop on, hop off bus thing,
Yeah.
and we're traveling around, and I realized that so the two of us sitting right next to each other, both observing the same place, and I was noticing trees and plants that were different in bloom in different, season than I was accustomed to or whatever. I'm kind of a plant guy. I like the horticulture. He was noticing the cars and different varieties, variations of cars he hadn't seen before. But so we were both in the same place at the same time, observing completely different
Yeah.
things just because of our interests and our own experience and what caught our eye. So yes, that ability to kind of compare notes later and go, what did you notice today? What was your favorite thing? And yes, two different people can have had the same experience and come away with completely different observations about it.
Right.
Yeah, cool.
Right. Oh, I hope you been to Cuba. This would be such a great experience. First of all, their experience with horticulture and their dependence on medicinal plants, since they, due to the embargo slash blockade, they're not able to get ready access to so many medications, and yet the cars that they have, it's just so
Oh,
interesting. A place that is so close to the United States and yet culturally so different, and what that can mean to you to see it. What a place where people to have seem to have nothing but time and very few resources or material goods that they can buy or touch or have access to.
mm,
And what does that do to someone when they're in that environment? You have this really rich culture when it comes to music and sports and discussion and dominoes, even if you don't have the same freedom of speech, but less concern about being homeless or houseless, and but concern about how am I going to get Tylenol if I have a fever.
mm,
And each country does have all of those different touch points um, that are constantly, again, making your brain think in a different way and connect
yep.
in a different way. Your cultural script stops working in the same way, and you're all of a sudden in a position to be more curious instead of certain about what life is about. And the
Yeah.
listening instead of assuming tends to happen more naturally.
You just touched on something, and it was next up. So curiosity. So this is something that comes up a lot in my discussions about education, because for me, curiosity is like the definition of engagement, right? And we hear so much discussion of, oh, kids are not engaged anymore. They're going through the motions in school, but they don't care. And, they're falling asleep or they're looking at their phones. And so for me, when students are asking questions, it means they're engaged in their learning, right?
Yeah.
They're curious, they want to learn. So tell me about how these programs actually and volunteering fuels curiosity.
Yeah, I do think that they do really fuel curiosity, but they're rewiring empathy, humility, systems thinking, things that textbooks can't do, because this isn't about simulations or case studies or internships. There's even though we're not intense, you do see poverty in most of our programs in a very direct way. And that can come with some discomfort, right? And even some thoughts on moral stakes and what does interdependence look like. And so by being confronted with that, even if it's slightly scary, we're in environments where people are functioning and have solutions to their problems and beauty and happiness around them that might be very different to what we are used to. For example, you'll find it's much easier to get a human eye contact and attention in our programs that you might not get at home. And this might not be a beauty that you're expecting to see. But when you start seeing an environment that is so different, these are the kinds of things that you can easily get curious about. And the first time I ever gave a wheelchair to the child, a landmine victim, I was expecting that looking at the child face to face was going to be what stayed with me. And while it did, I have to say it was looking at from my perspective as a parent, looking at the parent of that child just knocked me over. Seeing the look in their eyes that we both knew what it was like to have hopes and dreams and fears for a child. And
Mm.
that now their vision of a future for their child felt different, that it felt more independent, and that somebody bothered to spend money to come on a plane and look them in the eye and not just write a check, but to share that moment, that experience. Really, it's hard to put words to what that means. And the curiosity that comes out of this, again, isn't something that you know in advance. These are some unscripted outcomes that are happening real time. And uh, I know you know this, but you can go to a place like India where the disparity between the material resources that people have can be so great. And normally in our regular lives, we are usually all of us going, we're going to our school, our work, our grocery stores, but we tend to have, the three or four main places that we're going to. And it's hard to stretch our perspective beyond that because we're in routines.
Yeah.
And so allowing ourselves to go beyond those spaces, open up our minds, be curious, ask the questions, be around the leaders and coordinators who will help you see those things, helps our students and anyone involved in this kind of thing become better global citizens. And even, in my opinion, more ethical decision makers because they've seen the output, the outcomes on the different sides of these experiential equations.
Yeah. Somewhere there was a quote about it's hard to drop a bomb on somebody who you've seen face to face. So when you've been in one of these communities and Cuba, you were just talking about, right? So yes. And by the way, do you have a trip to Cuba? Do you guys do
We
it?
do have a trip to Cuba. I highly
Oh,
recommend it. And we're not a political organization. We have no religious or political affiliation. And it's, I think important when you go to a place like Cuba to learn all sides of it. This is the United States perspective, this is the Cuban perspective, because they really meet at an interesting point. In the US, our official policy is we don't want to do anything that will enrich the Cuban government. And everything is owned by the Cuban government.
yeah.
And on the Cuban side, they officially believe they would have no problems if it weren't for the United States embargo. And so they don't officially need our charity. So if you're trying to, and I say that those words in quotes, so it means if you're trying to work side by side with someone as equals in Cuba, that's a really fine line because you've
Mhm.
got to follow the laws on both sides. And getting to know what those laws and those policies are alone really helps you understand the policy that's happening on a much more granular, fine detail than just understanding, hearing what a law or a policy is, looking at what the policy does when it hits a real family, for good or for bad.
Yeah.
And you know, politically, we're obviously in a pretty divided world right now. And, you know, Rick Steves, who he had always said that, you know, it's if you really know people, it makes you want to bomb them less. Yeah.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
the Peace Corps, you know, Kennedy started that in the 60s because he really wanted to have a constituency from which the United States could find people who had learned how to create solutions to cross-cultural problems, and that the best way of doing that would be to have people who had lived in those communities
Mm.
working with them side by side, where they were trusted and had seen culturally how things operate. And anyway, you don't have to do 27 months or 24 months of the Peace Corps to get that kind of education. Certainly, if you've got that kind of time, that's a deeper way to do it. So you can't certainly take away from anyone who's decided to do that. But even if you don't have that kind of time or ability to give that kind of time, there are ways to connect to humanity in this way of experiential learning that many people overlook or don't even know is there.
Yeah. I'm sure you have some repeat customers too, right? You have folks who come back, do this as
Yeah,
a
a
yearly
huge
thing.
percentage of them actually. You know, usually
Yeah.
they start out worried about risk and what they're going to have to do or know, and how uncomfortable they'll be. And then once they've done it and realize how structured it is, that you really can just sign up and we take care of the rest, they'll usually start in Latin America and then go slowly further and further afield, you know, then Eastern Europe and then maybe Southeast Asia and then Zimbabwe and so on. But we've really seen a progression. We have a few people who will go back to the same places over and over, but the more usual progression is for people to keep adding to their cultural repertoire.
Yeah. I believe you've added a 26th site. What's the most recent one you've added?
I'm going to say Bhutan is probably our newest one. And we did that in 23, I think. We came at the invitation of the king who gave up all of his power years ago, but people still call him the king. And that's really a fascinating place, you know, sandwiched between the two giants of China and India, to have this tiny little peaceful pastoral country. It looks like Switzerland. And culturally, it's such its own place, you know, the way they dress, their architecture, the way they live, their art styles. And it's not easy to get to. I mean, there's a huge payoff for people who are willing to go, but it is not easy to get to. And the rules and laws keep changing. You know, they have this minimum sustainable development fee, and that has been restructured so many times just in the last couple of years. It's hard to keep up with, but I mean, it's part of what we do is
Yeah.
keeping track of all of that, so that our hope is that we're making this as easy and as accessible for somebody who knows nothing about the culture to just be able to do, to sign up, show up, you know, we make it worth your while. That's really our goal.
Yeah. All right. Story time. I want to hear a story of somebody who's been through your program and then gone and done something amazing and maybe credited you guys and said, you inspired me to go do something else. Do you got a story
Well,
like
I've got,
that?
I've got a bunch. But I'm going to give you one. So we it's not active this year, but we've had a program for years called Global Wings, where we would give scholarship positions to people to go and volunteer abroad. And we were focusing primarily on people who were first generation, who might not have family who had gone to college. And so we've worked with a variety of local grassroots organizations to locate those people in North America. And Adon Gonzalez, who was in high school when he did this and went on to Harvard and then Georgetown, and he says he's going to be the first Hispanic governor of Texas. And I wouldn't be surprised if he is. He's just really been a rock star. But then we've had volunteers like Don Gervais, who was a weatherman in Florida, and he had gone on a bunch of our programs and then fell in love with our program in Thailand and keeps going back there year after year. And every time he goes now, he does a big fundraiser where he'll do things like he'll see that our kids program there it didn't have any laundry equipment. They were doing everything by hand. And he'll have a fundraiser and raise, I don't know, $5,000, $7,000 and buy all of their laundry machines for them, or put in a new water system. All, these things that weren't even on our radar, that we weren't even planning to do, but that our volunteers got inspired to do from getting to know and see the local community, which that happens all the time, where our volunteers will be on location and see the local community and get to know them and ask them one-on-one, hey, what can I do? Or just, it can be simple, like, hey, they don't have enough soccer balls, and going and buying soccer balls. Or in places like South Africa, where so many of the kids have no shoes and they're playing barefoot. And so people will leave behind their tennis shoes and realize what that can do for a kid. So, boy, we have lots of those stories.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. So I'll just share. I've been involved in an organization here in Hong Kong now called Crossroads
Uh-huh.
Foundation. I actually had one of the founders was on the show to talk about they do these simulations that help teach people about the needs in the world and refugees and yeah, anyway, it's a powerful impact kind of thing. But I'm now volunteering on a weekly basis with them. And again, it was one of those kind of impact things where I met him. He was doing a workshop on water conservation, and it was so well done that I just went, wow, this is something I hadn't really thought about in some of these places where they have to carry water for great
Water.
distances in Africa or wherever. And so anyway, I now volunteer on a weekly basis, and it feels so good just to my little resources, right? I can't change the world, but each of us can have a small contribution that is helping
True.
somebody who really is in need. So I think that's just another element of what I love about GlobalWare is this concept of volunteering, right? That just a little bit of my time can make a difference somewhere. It's not about, I don't have some magic talent or superpower. I don't have to have great
Right.
wealth, but I can make a difference in somebody's life in a small way. And the cumulative effect of lots of people doing a little thing can have a huge impact. And as you say, sometimes you've planted a seed that then grows into,
Yeah.
a whole nother type of support and volunteer and commitment to supporting folks in need because you've opened the door for somebody to walk through. Anything else you want to share? This has been so good.
Sure. So many people focus on that concept of service and volunteering, and it is an important component of what we do. But I will say that it would be disingenuous if we didn't say it ends up being just as impactful or more so for the volunteer in terms of what they experience and in terms of the change or the way they see the world. And in many cases, you can just write a check and then where you can send money to Kenya and they will build the house with the money you send. But what happens when you get together? What happens to the volunteer inside when they're learning? How do you build a Wattle and Daub style home? And what does that entail? And what is their life like? And that experience of learning and connecting is just as important as the gift you're giving,
Mm,
that both in many cases it's the volunteer that's getting the deeper, richer thing out of it, and they come back a changed person. So I love the just understanding how impactful experiential learning can be in education and in terms of making an impact on someone who is learning.
mm.
And I wish there was a way to incorporate it more readily across all schools all across the planet. If I could just snap my fingers and make a carbon neutral way for everybody to be able to get from one country to another to get to know one another, I would do it, because that is still something that we haven't solved. That you've
Yeah.
got to acknowledge there's a large carbon footprint every time we get on an airplane. So it's a huge privilege. And from our perspective, if you're going to do that, then make the most of it. Make sure you leave the world a little bit better than you found it by having gone there.
Yeah. Here's a thought. So, one of the things I did a show on, it's called The Hive. It's this hybrid immersive virtual environment, and it's a classroom size cave, they call it, virtual environment done on the campus here of the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. But what they can do there, so if you go to one of these places, you go to Cambodia or wherever, and you do a 360 video, right? Yeah, it's pretty easy to do that these days, right? A GoPro or whatever, right? So you do a video, if you send it to them, they can then, so they have this classroom that's, all four walls, floor, ceiling will display the video. And so students can sit in the classroom and all of a sudden the classroom is Cambodia now. And they can look around and they can interact and they can kind of walk around. They can see. Now, you don't get the smells and the touch, but you can really see what's going on there. And so anyway, they're doing a number of these programs that really help the students feel like they're somewhere, even the space station, or they teach
great
stuff
use of
that
technology. That's
it's
great.
it's the hospital, right? They can actually, and they do some stuff that combines physical as well. Anyway, it's a really, really interesting program. So they have like a real hospital bed that sits in the room, and then they simulate the rest of it so they can actually practice in what feels like a real hospital setting, even though it's just a classroom. But you can get 30, 40 students in there. And the way it's designed, you don't need to wear a headset. So it's VR without a headset, which also means you see each other's eyes and you can see how other people are reacting. Your peers can point out stuff and draw your attention to it. So it's a neat use of it. But you guys could actually participate by just recording the videos, right?
Yeah, I
Do the
could see
360
that.
videos
Yeah,
and
I'm going to
and
look
share them
into them.
out.
I'm going to make
Yeah.
a note as soon as I get off the call to look them up. That's interesting.
Yeah. Well, it just, I can connect you. You let me know
Please do. That'd
you
be
want to
great.
do something with them. Yeah. I've been trying to get them to figure out how to scale what they did. So why doesn't every campus have a classroom like that? They figured out how to do it. They should, and they're willing to share. They have some patents and stuff that they got in the process of building this out. It's a very interesting learning experience. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. Eric, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Kimberly.
So this was kind of a new angle on experiential learning. Globalware is not an education organization, but what they do is absolutely educational. They don't follow a strict pedagogy or a structured curriculum, but they give people real life experiences that change the way they see the world. Education is not always formal. We learn through experiences, and I'm so thankful that Kimberly was able to share with us, how their programs work. And I hope you'll take a closer look at Globalware, maybe join one of their volunteering experiences. I have a link to Globalware also in the show notes. If you're enjoying this show, and I certainly hope that you are, please subscribe and share. We have so many more guests lined up with amazing stories of innovation and education. You just don't want to miss out. So hit that subscribe button. All right. I'm Eric Byron. Thanks for listening to the Education Innovators podcast. And to all those education innovators out there, thanks for doing what you do. You are making a difference.